Well, thank you so much, Karen, and I have to apologize beforehand. Everyone in here has a very charming, wonderful Southern accent, and I have a very ugly, thick Chicago accent. So for the next 60 minutes, you're going to have to bear with me on that front. So I come from a company called Bridgeworks, and we are a company that studies generational trends, looking at consumer patterns and looking at behavioral patterns based on age segmentation. And we were founded about 15 years ago by Lynn Lancaster and David Stillman. And how they started this company was Lynn is that traditional buttoned-up competitive baby boomer with that perfect blonde California hair. And there we go. Is this better? Okay, sorry about that. And she has, always put together and just perfect. And then her business partner, David Stillman, is a very traditional Gen Xer. So when they met, Lynn is in her business suit, and she is perfect, and David comes in Converse shoes. He's rocking a ponytail and a Nirvana t-shirt. And she's like, this isn't gonna work. Like, we can't work like this. And David always loved making Lynn feel as old as possible. That was part of his job, was just making her feel outdated and feel so old. Well, then a couple years ago, the Millennials started coming into the workplace. And so Bridgeworks hired me, and along with a couple other Millennials, to do some of the speaking, to do some of the consulting, but really we were doing most of the research in terms of our generation. But our job was to make David feel as old as possible. And so Lynn was loving that. But what's funny is that it only takes a few short years from when you feel like you're the young, cool, hip generation to when you start feeling really old and outdated. And I know that there are some kids in here right now who are the next generation. And I had my first experience feeling old and feeling like I wasn't the new, cool, hip generation recently. My brother, Josh, and his wife, they have 2 kids, and they're great parents. I don't know if any of you are the type of parents who every single thing that their children do, the first of everything, is the biggest event in history. Okay, the first time they ride a bike, their first day of school, it's like the circus comes to town. And so obviously the first time that they lose a tooth is like a national holiday in their family. And so recently, this was about 2 weeks ago, Isla, my niece, she lost her first tooth. And they do this whole thing where they could make me believe in the tooth fairy. It's like the tooth fairy calls the house. The tooth fairy is my mother, by the way. She's like played the tooth fairy now for 30 years. And so she calls the house and asks to speak with Isla and is like, hi, Isla, I'm the tooth fairy. I'm going to come and I'm going to give you money or whatever it is. And then while Isla is sleeping, my brother and his wife actually, they take a glue stick and they put glue on her forehead and then put on glitter. Okay, so that it looks like a fairy actually like went past your forehead. So if any of you are these types of parents, this is a really good tip because this is a really fun piece. Now, so Isla is dozing off and going to go to sleep, and my brother and his wife are in the wings, and they're so excited to make this magical moment happen. They're like, yes, here we go, here's the big moment. Well, their older son comes up to them, and he's like, Dad, what are you doing? And he's like, what do you mean? We did this for you. We made this magical moment happen for you. And now it's Isla's turn. And she's like, she knows that there isn't a tooth fairy. She knows that. And he's like, how would she know that? She's 6. She doesn't know up from down. How would she know? And he goes, well, Dad, she Googled it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Now I'm 105. Like, now I'm not the new cool generation because we didn't have these types of tools when I was younger. We couldn't Google the tooth fairy and all these types of things. So I know that this next generation is going to come up and they're going to be much cooler and much hipper than we are, and it's just something I have to get used to. Now on the personal front, these moments are funny and they're kind of painful, but on the professional front, when we're looking at recruiting and retaining and motivating and engaging 4 distinct generations, things can get a little bit more difficult. And I love this theme that you have here of seizing every opportunity, because I think that we are in a really unique time where we have this opportunity to be working with different generations and different types of people who make us wiser and make us stronger and push us harder and we need to be able to take advantage of that and harness the power and unique abilities of all 4 generations, or else the opportunity will be missed. So the challenge is that when we start talking about generations, we automatically go to a place of stereotyping and a negative place where it's all about who walked uphill both ways in the snow to get to school, and who doesn't have any work ethic, and who's entitled, and who is stuck in their ways, when in reality what we find are that the companies that are able to use these unique gifts of each generation and put them together in a harmonious way are the ones who really have a competitive edge and the ones who really come out on top. And also we can all come together and have a little fun as we see the next 2 do so well in this commercial clip.
Stuart, can I see you in my office, please?
That kid is sick. Pins is squeak. He's very sick.
Stuart, get in here.
Sure thing, Mr. P.
Stuart, I just opened my Ameritrade account.
Let's light this candle. Let's go to Ameritrade.com. It's easier than falling in love. What do you feel like buying today, Mr. P?
Kmart.
So research it. All this stuff is provided for you free of charge.
No cost.
Yeah, that's synonymous with free.
Looks like a good stock.
Let's buy.
Let's buy 100 shares.
All right, click it in there.
Okay.
How about 500?
100, Stuart.
You feel the excitement? You're about to buy a stock.
Okay.
Online.
Oh! Fabulous. I'm thrilled. What did that cost me?
$8, my man.
Mike Broker charges me $200 for this.
Riding the wave of the future, my man. I gotta get a soda.
All right.
I'm sorry, Mr. P. I'm having a party on Saturday night if you really want to go.
I'm going to try and get there. Thank you, Stuart.
Trading.
Thank you.
Rock on.
All right, Stuart.
I've seen this commercial a million times, but it always cracks me up. And Lynn and David were actually working with the firm that put this commercial out. And they got a ton of responses from this campaign. People were writing in saying how much they loved it, how funny they thought it was, how much people related to the different characters. And that part, you know, that kid is sick. Does anyone know that woman in their office? Is anyone that person in their office? Because there is one in every office. But we love this because it really shows, you know, these 2 very different characters authentically being themselves. And we see some of that reverse mentorship. We see, you know, Stuart, the young kid, is the one who's also teaching something to Mr. P, and he's open to it. And you just have this moment of friendship and this moment of respect between the 2 of them, which I think is great. And these are the types of relationships that we want to foster within our companies, because that's where we see a lot of innovation happen. Now, first let's look at who are the generations in the workplace today. We have got the traditionalists, born before 1946, into a group of 75 million. And I love if I could just get a little gauge of who I have in the room. And if you want to bump yourself down a generation, that is fine. No one is going to call you out on that. But do we have any traditionalists in the room? No traditionalists in the room. Okay. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. Let's see the baby boomers. Usually the boomers are like on their chairs, cheering for themselves. So thank you, Debbie. There we go. Meanwhile, the Gen Xers are rolling their eyes like, oh my God. Okay, so now, and so the baby boomers, that's a group of 80 million. And then we have the Gen Xers, 1965 to 1981, group of 6. Wow. I have never heard a Gen X cheer louder than the baby boomers, ever. So that was really fun. And then millennials, 1982 to 2000. Do we have millennials in the room? Oh, good. Okay, good. We do have some. You can cheer too. That's okay. No one. I'm a millennial. That's fine. And so I know that Karen said 76 million. This number is actually, it's about 82 million now. And I want to point out a couple things about these numbers. First of all, and since Karen mentioned it, when we talk about this new global economy, we do a lot of research on especially emerging markets, millennials and emerging markets. So I do just want to let you know, first of all, obviously these numbers are based on the 2010 census, so these are US-centric numbers. But one thing that we do see all over the world is this boom-bust-boom pattern. Does anyone, by any chance, want to shout out maybe why Gen X is a much smaller generation? Does anyone know? Baby boomers weren't getting busy. Okay, I guess that's, except this is the sex, drugs, and rock and roll generation, so I'm gonna assume that's not true, but I guess that could be one. No. Birth control, right. So this is the emergence of women entering the workforce and contraception. And so all over the world, we do see this as a much smaller generation. Now the millennials, this 82 million number, when this came out in the 2010 census, some of you may remember, but this was the cover of Time magazine. This was making a lot of headlines, and for a couple reasons. One of them being that just based on the pattern of birth rate, we were not supposed to be this big. A huge portion of this number is based on immigration patterns. So millennials look a lot different than the generations before. The other thing is when you think about 82 million, the fact that the sheer size of a generation outnumber the baby boomers has a lot of implications when we think about the economic landscape of this country, the political landscape of this country, and the cultural landscape. A lot of this is going to be heavily impacted by that 82 million number. And the demographics of Tallahassee are actually really interesting. You have 54% millennials. So you have a huge portion of your population are in this age demographic. You've got 21% Xers, 17% baby boomers, and 8% traditionalists. So you have an incredibly young population living in Tallahassee, which is great and which has a lot of strengths. But I know that one thing that's important and one thing that I spoke to some of you about is getting those FSU students, those FAMU students, TCC, getting these people to stay in the community, getting these people to not only just go to school here, but also to stay. And I think that so many things that what you're doing are putting you on the right track to do that, because this is an incredibly progressive and forward-thinking community. Now, these numbers are really just a starting place when we think about how a generation is created. You're all bright people, so I know you know that it's not like you go to bed on December 31st, 1964, and then someone wakes up January 1st, 1965, and is a different creature, right? This study is actually based on events and conditions of your formative years. So what does that mean? Research has found that during your formative years, which is roughly your teenage years, you're coming to terms with the world around you. So obviously what is happening in the world around you during that time has a profound and lasting impact on the way that you view things like collaboration and leadership and social justice and community. And for any of you who have teenagers or really remember your teenage years well, a lot of teenage angst comes from this time. This is when your whole life your parents have maybe taught you how to vote or how to think, and then all of a sudden you reach an age and you're thinking, no way. I have my own views on what this is going to look like. And we can't talk about the generations without people asking, is this a way to stereotype people or put people into a box? And I want to say no. Okay, this is a complete sociological study. This is not psychological. This is not the study of an individual. There are a million things that go into the creation of who you are. And you could be from a farm, you could be from an urban area, you could be an only child, a million different things. What we study, it's a research-based study that looks at patterns, consumer trends, behaviors of broad populations. So it's a look at cultural shifts. So that's what we're studying. So as we go through the generations, some parts of it, you're gonna be like, oh, that's so me, or that's so my daughter, or whatever it is. And there are gonna be other parts where it might not fit with you exactly. But again, it's the study of these populations. So let's think about some of the events and conditions that have shaped the millennial generation. So I will introduce to you the millennials. We come from a generation of 82 million, the children of the boomers. We are a generation that has never known a world without Gore-Tex, the Walkman, the Post-it note, video games, rollerblades, Simon the Toy, Simon the Judge, touch-tone phones, smoke detectors, inkjet printers, and the internet. The Cold War was over before I had my first kiss, lost my 12-year molars, or could go to a PG-13 movie. And like all generations, we had our pop stars, we had our rock stars, and of course, we always got our own stars. We had many of our heroes built up before our eyes, and we watched many others fall from grace. And of course, if we're going to talk about the millennial generation, we have to talk about technology. And while the other generations are merging onto this information superhighway, for better or for worse, we were really born in the fast lane. Boomers from kindergarten through high school enjoyed years of the mimeograph machine. Do any of you out there remember this? Right? People still talk about getting high off the fumes. I think this was really the beginning of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I think this was the start of it. We were toddlers when Apple Macintosh released the first personal computer, the Apple AE7. It was 128 kilobytes. Its total storage is the size of one tweet on Twitter today. By the time we were graduating high school, this Apple AE7 had become a cell phone that could download ringtones 10 times the size of Apple AE7. 24 hours a day, information blasted at us from every direction, from the unspeakable to the unusual to the unforgettable. At the touch of our fingertips, we could take a picture of you with our phone, upload it onto Facebook, and have it out there for the whole world to see. Xers remember having kids on milk cartons. Millennials walked into high school through metal detectors. And where wars and scary things were happening oftentimes oceans away for other generations, for our generation, it was in the desks next to us. It's the generation of Columbine, Oklahoma City, and Virginia Tech. And the world felt like a much scarier place. And it felt much more scary when I was in my freshman year gym class to find that our country was under attack. And we definitely knew that the world that we live in was never going to be the same. But while everyone talks about the events of September 11th really being the moment for our generation, what really defines us, I would say that what really defines our generation is what happened starting September 12th. We were raised by these optimistic, idealistic baby boomers who always taught us to not sit back, but to fight back, and to roll up our sleeves and make a difference and have an impact and change the world. And that's exactly what we set out to do. And speaking of change, this 4 gigabyte USB stick can now hold 31,250 Apple AE7s. So that's a little bit about the Millennial Generation. And as you can see, the events and conditions that have shaped our generation are drastically different from the ones that have uniquely shaped the generations before us. Now, this can be very good, and this brings a lot of great things to the table, but it also is causing a lot of collisions within the workplace. In fact, the group of us that were working at Bridgeworks, the Millennials that were working there, one of our first projects was Bridgeworks had done this huge survey with a market research firm that we work with, and I was an intern at the time, an unpaid intern, obviously. And so, the unpaid interns have to go through all of the survey results and pull out some of the portions that we find really interesting. And one thing that we found in our national M-Factor survey was that traditionalists, boomers, and Gen Xers all said millennials were the toughest generation to work with. I saw this and I was like, can't be true. I am a gem to work with. People love working with me. And then we actually come to find out that 26% of millennials cited our own generation as the toughest to work with. We don't even want to work with ourselves. So we're going to work on changing this today. And I do just want to say that it's not all the other generations. Millennials have a lot that we need to learn and get up to speed on as well. So this is not an out with the old, in with the new mentality, because we've seen companies who have taken that approach, where you get almost over-hyped up about the millennial generation, and you forget to draw out the unique strengths of the others, and now they're in very tough positions because knowledge transfer wasn't happening, succession planning wasn't happening, and now you have a young generation who has a lot of exciting things going on and has a lot of ideas and has absolutely no experience. So it's important to have a blend of those two things in order to create a great workforce. So let's jump into our first generation, which is our traditionalists. There we go. So the traditionalist generation, I understand that a lot of you in your companies are not working with a traditionalist, with maybe someone of this age. But what we found is that a lot of companies still have that traditionalist mentality, that top-down command and control style of leading. and your hierarchy, your organizational structure oftentimes was created by a traditionalist. So that's why it's important to still understand some of the communication habits of this generation. Now, this is the generation, some of you may be familiar with Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, and this is the generation that he's referring to. This is the generation that on one hand was brought up very high by the Roaring '20s and then brought down very low by the Great Depression. And even if you weren't born till right after that time, you were still greatly affected by it. Between the years of 1932 and 1933, the average family income was reduced by 40%. So this is the true waste not, want not generation. They really understood what it meant to put your own needs aside in order to achieve the needs of the greater good. This generation, over 50% of traditionalist men were veterans of either World War II or the Korean War. They partnered with big institutions to create great change. And because of that, they have faith in big institutions. They created many of the big institutions. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they trust institutions? They partnered with them to fight back from the Great Depression, to create an economic boom, to build the highway system, and the list goes on. So because of this, this is a very loyal generation. They're loyal to their family. They are loyal to brands. Did any of you come from a Chevy or Ford family? You remember that? I'm seeing some of the heads nodding. It was like the Chevy family wasn't allowed to speak to the Ford family. It was different planets. Our current CEO, she was an executive at General Mills for a long time, and she tells how her grandfather, when she started working at General Mills, he threw away all the Frosted Flakes, and he would go to the grocery stores and hide, the Kellogg's cereal, so that it was always Cheerios everywhere. But just showing, just how loyal he is to his granddaughter and to the company that she is with. And they have this great faith in institutions, and they are still that generation. They would come in and they would work for the same company for 35 years. That is not something that we see anymore, that gold watch. Now, the other thing that traditionalists do in terms of communication, they do have that top-down command and control style. And I'm sure you're familiar with this style because you're going to know the end of this sentence. But to a traditionalist, when I say jump, you would say, how high, right? Now a millennial, I'm already hearing people laughing. A millennial, when you say jump to us, what do we say? Why? Or you jump, or I have a hula hoop and we're doing a different way of jumping. Seth Madison and I, another consultant, we were doing this in Canada recently, and I asked this question: when I say jump to a millennial, what do they say? And one of the millennials in the back yells, "Screw you." I'm like, all right, much more aggressive north of the border. But exactly, it's a very different mentality from the when I say jump, you say how high, to why. And millennials grew up feeling comfortable pushing back on authority and asking a lot of questions. There wasn't so much of that, you're in charge, and so I do what you say. And let me tell you where some of this comes from. We have been chiming in with our parents since we were 3 years old. Now, I used to, if I was late for curfew in high school, which happened really rarely, but if that was the case, I would walk in, and my parents were obviously awake, right? You don't go to sleep until your child gets home. That's just how it works. So I would get home, and my parents would be like, "Kim, come here." Okay, and then we would sit down at the kitchen table, and they'd be like, "How do you think you should be punished?" And I was like, okay, right? And we would talk about it, and we would discuss, and we would come to a mutual decision. So it's, I can't go to Billy's birthday party on Friday, I can't watch Saved by the Bell for a week, and that was it. And we hugged, and everything was great, and everything was fine. But how many of you grew up in a dictatorship? Right, well, millennials are growing up in a very active democracy where everyone is getting a vote on every decision. Now, not just that, but we do a lot of work in the hospitality space. And guess who the #1 planner of family vacations was last year? Kids. Right, because our baby boomer parents, they're burnt out, they're stressed out. They're like, all right, we want to go on vacation, and I want to play golf, and Dad wants to play tennis, we want somewhere warm, find us some options. You'll go to the grocery store, meanwhile your 12-year-old is on the internet, like, brrrr, and you come back, And there, you know, we can go to Disneyland, we can go to a beautiful resort in Florida. Here are the options. Give me your credit card. And then we go, and there you go, family vacations planned. Similar, we do a lot, we track a lot of the real estate trends. And there's something called the MLS click. It's the frontline click for people buying a home. Do you know who the #1 person was clicking on that click? It's millennials. Because again, parents they're burnt out, they're stressed out, they have a million things on their plate. They're like, you know where your friends live, you know the school districts, you know our budget, find us some house options. So then we get into work, and our boss is like, you can come to the meeting, but you can't say anything. And we're like, dude, I just bought my dad a house. So I feel like maybe there's something I can contribute to this meeting. Now, on top of that, on top of growing up in a really collaborative environment, right now we're also seeing a lot of monumental change coming from people who are our age. Ooh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong button there. Sorry. Okay, so we're seeing this change come from our generation all over the world. And we're seeing this and it's impacting us. And we're wanting to have that voice. And as this next commercial shows us in a fun way, we really are wanting to speak up and used to speaking up at a young age.
Hey, who's this?
Oh, that's Kyle. He aced his 5th grade geography class.
Huh.
You see, now that we're using FedEx to ship globally, I have to learn all the countries again, so I brought in Kyle as a consultant. Did you know that we have customers in Czechoslovakia?
Actually, it's called the Czech Republic.
Yes, Kyle. You are a lifesaver. And without Kyle, I never would have heard of that new country called Buttheadistan.
We understand you want to grow internationally. FedEx serves over 220 countries and territories.
So we have 82 million young people entering the workforce, like Kyle here, who want to speak up and who want to make a difference. And they're used to having constant communication and being able to speak up. I saw on the website for Capital City Bank that right here, big on their website as part of really who they are is communication. It says up, down, and often. And so having where it used to be where communication just went down the ladder, now it's going up the ladder and it's happening all the time. So what can you do in your businesses to help with this? Well, one thing is that you want to find ways to be able to bring this voice to the table. One client of ours that we've worked with for a long time is US Bank. They landed on Forbes 100 Best Places to Work list after they released the Dynamic Dozen, which is a program where 12 high-potential new employees are allowed every quarter to come to a meeting with Richard Davis, the CEO of US Bank. And they're allowed to present new ideas to him. Now, what they're finding in engagement surveys is that all of the millennials in the company are feeling represented. Even if they're not one of the 12 that are in that actual room, there's young people in there, they're peers who are allowed to have a voice with the CEO. Now on the other side, we're hearing from Richard Davis that there are ideas coming up that he never would have thought of, that the executive team would never have come across. And I understand that for the other generations, this can be a tough pill to swallow. I do understand that because for so many other generations, it was you came in and it was your head was down, you were doing the work until you ascended into roles where you were allowed to be heard. But with this generation, that this is such a huge engagement factor for them, there are really only 2 things that can happen here. One of them is that one of these kids says something totally ridiculous and you have a coaching opportunity. Or they say something great and it's a game changer and it's something that we would never have come up with before. And maybe this will ease your mind a little bit, but one thing is that when we were handing our parents those 5 options for places to go, we knew that we weren't making the final decision. The final decision was still up to our parents, and that really translates into the workplace. We want to have an input, but we do understand that the executive or our manager, those are the decision makers. You will make the final decision. We just want to be part of the decision-making process on some level. So that's a huge thing to remember and a huge engagement factor. So we do want to have a voice, but millennials really have to remember that we need to be listening to the knowledge and wisdom of all of the other generations. And unfortunately, in many organizations, you can be pulling out your org chart and you're looking at places where people are retiring, and you're hitting the streets to find the new talent that is going to fill those places. And this new talent, they want to bring their dogs to work, they want a 3 o'clock break for yoga, and so you're trying to figure out how you're going to manage these people and how they're going to get up to speed. But what's happening is that on the other side, you have got traditionalists and baby boomers leaving companies, and they have all the experience, they have the client relationships, they have the face-to-face communication skills, and those are not being transferred. We hear from executives all the time that they feel like the guy in this cartoon, where it says, I think I've acquired some wisdom over the years, but there doesn't seem to be much demand for it. Now, there are some companies who are doing great things around mentorship programs. This is a great way to transfer this knowledge and to prevent this huge loss when people are leaving. I spoke with Debbie Leonard from Thomas Howell & Ferguson, and she told me about this great program that they do. New hires have mentors, buddies, and coaches, and all these people serve a different function. So whether it's about practical application, career development, or personal relationships, the new hires are able to form relationships of substance with managers and senior leaders, and they feel supported and knowledge is being transferred. So they're getting the skills that are necessary to be learned from the other generations, and in addition, when young people, or when there is just a feel of being supported in a company, that's when innovation actually happens, because people feel comfortable bringing their ideas to the table, and that's what can help push the envelope. And we find that as technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in businesses, that people are getting away from the fact that companies are still built on people skills. And this younger generation, if there is something that they really desperately struggle with, it is creating face-to-face relationships and being comfortable with that type of communication. I love this from Prime Meridian Bank. Good banking is still a product of good people. And that's so true. And so that's why it is very important to understand how to do this. Now, 2 tips on this. One is, we're finding more companies are actually putting this in the job description for some of their older employees, where knowledge transfer and mentorship are actually part of what they are reviewed on. How well are you doing this? How well are you able to take people who are under you, bring them under your wing, and bring them up to speed? So having actual requirements. And on the flip side, hold newer employees accountable for going out and seeking this information. We shouldn't have to be spoon-fed, but it is important that we're finding ways to go out and reach out to them. Because as much as the younger generations flood into the workplace and we think we have the latest and the greatest and the best ideas, traditionalists will always be the generation that can teach us a thing or two.
Stejně neumí plavat.
Your risks are always evolving. Shouldn't your insurance stay in sync? Travelers.
All right, so we talked about our traditionalist generation, and now we'll move on to our baby boomers. Yes, I know, exactly. I have to say that one thing that we do is we look at advertising and marketing and see how are these generations being displayed in the media and how are companies going after this generation. And I have to say that baby boomers are the easiest target in the world. Advertisers have you so pegged on exactly how to reach you. And one of them is that this generation is keen on raging against aging. Boomers have redefined every life stage that they've hit. And as they somewhat approach some of that retirement age, everything looks completely different because they are forever young. And Pepsi does a great job of tapping into that, like we see in this award-winning campaign.
Here come those hippies again.
Test 1, 2, 1, check.
Is that you, Sunflower?
Pigpen?
Oh. The place hasn't changed in 25 years.
Yeah, it's a shame. You know, they should have put in some condos by now.
Joe, remember when we did this 25 years ago?
Country Joe McDonald.
No.
Wouldn't it be nice if your youth was as easy to hold on to as an ice-cold Pepsi?
You think they'll go skinny dipping again? Yeah. I hope not.
It's a great campaign. It's a great campaign. All right, so our boomers. Some of the influences from boomers. Any of the boomers in the room just want to shout out some influences that shaped you growing up? There was just like too many. What did you say? The Beatles, yeah. The whole Woodstock thing. Anything else? Kiss? Yep. Vietnam, Watergate, yeah. Did any of you by any chance ever see the movie The Sandlot? Yeah, it's a great movie, great movie. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's the summer of 1967. It's a group of boys who, to me, this just is what growing up for a baby boomer was like. It's the golden age to be a kid. This is, the sun goes up in the morning, and all the kids run outside and play, and you're in tree houses, and you're playing baseball, and you're not wearing seatbelts, and you're not wearing helmets, and I have no idea how any of you survived this long, but you managed. As you grew up, you struggled with national events like Watergate and Vietnam. But what I love so much about this generation is that you didn't sit back, you fought back. And there are so many things that the younger generations can take for granted that you gave us. This was human rights and women's rights and civil rights and voters' rights. All of these rights that we now have were a result of this boomer fight. Now, the other side of the boomers is that they grew up with 80 million people. And so if you weren't willing to stay late at your job, there were 80 million people behind you who were willing to. And because of this, they are an incredibly competitive generation. Do I have any competitive boomers in the room? It's usually a competition on who can raise their hand the fastest. That's usually how it goes. But yeah, an incredibly competitive generation. And because of this, they've created an insane work ethic. They have changed the 40-hour work week to the 80-hour work week. And we have you to thank for that as well, so thank you. Now, where does this collide with the millennials? Well, millennials come cruising in, and we're like, it's 5 o'clock. I gotta go to a softball game, gotta go. And boomers are thinking, are you crazy? Our hours were, you got there 10 minutes before the boss and you left 10 minutes after. Those were your working hours. And millennials are not really doing that. The reality is that we are motivated by very different things than what boomers were motivated by. For one, we aren't competing the same way for jobs. Now, post-recession, there's a bit of a difference, and some theorists are somewhat splitting us up between those grads who graduated into a pre-recession economy versus post-recession. But actually, in terms of statistics, we haven't seen a huge difference. But also because we've become so service-oriented that there are more jobs than there were opportunities for baby boomers. The other thing is that baby boomers were married, had families at younger ages. For millennials, we are eating ramen noodles, we are paying cheap rent, and most of us are single. So we don't have those same types of pressure. Now the other thing is that our baby boomer parents love us so much. So much, and we love them. One thing that we do during our surveys is about every 2 years, one of the questions on the survey is about who are your role models, measuring people's aspirations. And for baby boomers, it's Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Gloria Steinem, these big figures. Xers, we actually see a lot of larger-than-life characters also. Michael Jordan still comes up on that list all the time for Xers. For millennials, by a landslide, some of you are going to roll your eyes, mom and dad. Those are our heroes. Now, because of that, we have this huge safety net. I mean, for the boomers in the room, think about your relationships with your children. right? You would never let them out on the street. So for boomers, you had all the motivation you needed. You turned 18 and your parents were like, see ya, it's been real. Out the door you go. So you did not have a choice. There was much more sink or swim. Now, in addition, nothing goes without consequences. And baby boomers, the entire economy and what this country looks like was drastically changed under the ultra-focused eye of the baby boomer. But there were also some dire consequences. About half of baby boomers have been divorced. There are some health issues. So there were trade-offs from these sacrifices that were made. And in addition, think about some of the things that you say to your children. Because what we hear from our parents is, on your deathbed, no one ever said, I wish I spent more time at the office. And millennial children are listening to that type of communication very seriously and taking that to heart. Also, during my great conversation with Debbie, she said, the younger people will come in and they'll do all the work, they'll do a great job, and then they leave. Then they go home. And as soon as the assignment or project is finished, they're out the door. And I respect that. I'm happy for them. They're doing a great job, but they are living their lives. And we see executives on two different sides of this coin. We see some who are like, no way. A work week is 80 hours and that's the way it is. And then we're seeing other executives saying, you know what, I made so many sacrifices and I look back now and I'm just not 100% sure that that was worth it. I'm not 100% sure that I wouldn't make changes if I could go back and do it again. And that is the messaging that a lot of millennials are hearing. So what does motivate us? What are the motivating factors? One big one that we are seeing across the board in every different country, the biggest global connector for millennials, they are saying in the workplace, I want the opportunity to do meaningful work and I want a meaningful role within that. Something that we call meaning is the new money. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, yeah, Kim, but we all want to do meaningful work. That's what everyone wants. And I completely agree. Everyone wants meaningful work. The difference is that the other generations really understood that you came in, you did the grunt work, and then you ascended into roles where you were allowed to have these more meaningful positions. Well, now you've got your 20-year-old intern coming in on day one demanding meaningful work. One of the biggest things that we can do to light this fire and to harness this power is to connect the dots. For millennials, take time to explain how that first entry-level job actually is impacting the vision of the company and the overall goals, and how what they're doing right now is something that can actually translate into pushing the company forward. One company that really did a great program with this, client of ours, is Thomson Reuters. They have a program called Line of Sight. And what this is during orientation for their new hires, they actually have, it's a visual, it's a really great visual thing that they made where the new hire can actually track how what they're doing, just the mundane, somewhat entry-level job, is actually having an impact on the bottom line and the overall vision of the company. Another client of ours that does a really interesting program is Johnson & Johnson. They were having an issue with scientist turnover, which turning over a scientist costs you about $1 quadrillion, so it's really a non-option. So their junior scientists were just these young people who were spending most of their time in labs working on very specific projects. They were creating new drugs. We were working with the pharma side. And what they did is they started doing at their meetings, at their quarterly meetings, they would bring in a patient who was using this drug. The one that they were specifically working on at the time was one for schizophrenia. And they would bring someone in who was taking the drug, and they would talk to the scientists about how much this drug impacted their lives and how they were able to do things that they never thought that they could do because of the work that these scientists were doing. And turnover went way down and engagement went through the roof with those kinds of programs. Now, finally, for a generation that wants meaningful careers, don't underestimate the power of your community involvement work. Millennials want to work for organizations that care about the community that they live in. And the Tallahassee community is, the camaraderie here is honestly amazing, something that I haven't seen in a lot of other communities. So that's a huge kudos to all of you. And I know that a lot of you do great work within your community. One of the programs that I think is so great is with More Communications Group. One thing that they do is they allow employees to identify groups whose missions speak directly to them. And I found that this is interesting because I did not know who Karen was, and she introduced herself, and I was like, oh, hey, what's up, how are you? And she was like, oh, I'm from More Consulting, or I am More Consulting. I mean, I'm the founder of that, and I had no idea before I picked this out. But this is a fantastic program because what they allow employees to do is actually take things that are personal to them. Take things that really, I mean, one of their employees right now, she is an artist. You know, loves art and she loves dance and all of that. And so one of the things that they are funding this year is this great art program. And so it's personal to employees. So talk about a great engagement factor. And one of the things that they got could partially because of this is they're one of the fastest growing companies. They're one of the best companies to work for in all of Florida. And this is a great engagement factor and something to talk about during recruitment. The other one that I think is great, Florida Blue, Building a Healthier Tomorrow, starts by giving back today. And they partnered with Junior Achievement of North Florida, Miami Heat's Read to Achieve program, and Florida Health Literacy Initiative. And these are really important programs because what we found is 90% of millennials said having opportunities to give back via my company is at least somewhat important to me when I'm considering joining an organization. But only 26% agreed that their company did a good job of addressing that during recruitment. So many of you have these great programs in place, and it's important that when you're going to these great schools around you and you're looking to recruit top talent, make sure that you're highlighting these programs because this is a huge part of your company culture that would drive millennials to you. And this want to volunteer and make a difference is not going away because not only did our boomer parents tell us all about their fight and how they got involved, but also the media was giving us a lot of these messages as we were growing up. All right, so we talked about our traditionalist generation, we talked about our baby boomers, and now we're gonna give it to the really rowdy and excited Gen X. All right, let's hear from Gen X. What are some of the big influences that impacted you while you were growing up? The what? The garbage spill kids? Okay. I don't know what that is. That's not one up there because I don't know exactly what that is. I'll find you after to have you elaborate on that. What else? What? Saved by the Bell, yes. Madonna, yeah. Kurt Cobain, Michael Jackson. It's a lot of music. You guys were all in your basements having those MTV music marathons. It was the end of children playing outside. That was the Gen X contribution. Now, one thing that is interesting, and just to show you how different generations can view the same institution, I want to try this. For baby boomers, when I say NASA, what do you think of? The moon landing, right? You think of space, you think of the moon landing. And what did that represent? That represented that we can do anything. Anything we set our minds to. Xers, when I say NASA to you, what do you think? The Challenger. Totally different view of the same institution. I mean, you would think if you could trust anyone, it was going to be the geniuses at NASA. But then you're sitting in your, rooms in high school, and you're watching this happen, and it's like, who can you even trust? The biggest influencer of the Gen X generation was actually the media, was the emergence of 24-hour media. Because besides watching all of the Michael Jackson and all of the Nirvana videos in your basement, you were also watching these institutions that were built by traditionalists and then greatly improved upon by baby boomers. They were all being called into question at this time. During one of my first focus groups, David Stillman was running it, and an Xer said to him, "You name the institution and I can name the crime." And that was really how Xers felt. Again, I'm going to show you an advertisement, and this was really interesting. Monster was one of the first companies that really started speaking to Xers in a very different way. I mean, think about that Pepsi commercial. The great music and everything is so great, and I want you to see how Monster spoke the Gen X language in this campaign.
When I grow up, on a file all day.
I want to claw my way up to middle management. Be replaced on a whim. I want to have a brown nose.
I want to be a yes man.
Yes, woman. Yes, sir. Coming, sir.
Anything for a raise, sir.
When I grow up,
I want to be underappreciated.
be paid less for doing the same job.
I want to be forced into early retirement.
That's a great campaign. That was perfect messaging. Now, so on one side, they were seeing institutions being called into question, and they were seeing a lot of things crumble on that front. But also, it was during the Gen X birth years that the US divorce rate tripled. So you have a whole generation of kids coming home to empty houses. They either have divorced parents or both parents are working, and they organized their own time. They put their own food in the microwave. They obviously were turning on their own TV. And because of this, they are a fiercely independent generation. Very comfortable with change, skeptical, but very independent. Now, to a Gen Xer, in the ideal world, how they would get work done is you tell me where you want it, when you want it, how you want it. I'm going to go away. Hopefully, you're going to go away. And then we're going to get it done. Well, now come the millennials, the super collaborators. The generation that we grew up going to classes like team mediation. And every project that we ever did was done in a group. And we were always taught, for an Xer, the communication was if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Millennials were brought up with 2 heads are better than 1, and 3 heads are better than 2. So this is one of the biggest collisions that we see in the workplace today. Fierce independence with hyper collaboration. So what do we do? And I do know that there are a lot of companies who are really embracing this with millennials. I know that CenturyLink, for example, in some of their companies, they have that, the walls are knocked down and people can all sit together. And in Xer, they're like, we want an office where the door closes and locks. And millennials are like, we want to knock down the walls. We want to sit in like a kumbaya chat room on a bunch of beanbag chairs. And Xers are like, get out of my face. But here's the thing, the collaborative leadership approach, it is an important style of leadership and one that is not going away. So one thing that can be done, and a lot of companies are now getting Xer managers trained on how to do this better, on how to be more collaborative leaders. And on the flip side, millennials really need to understand how to be effective independent contributors. That was always something that our generation really struggled with, was how to step away from the security blanket of a group and just do what needs to be done. And there are a couple ways to go about this. One is to really manage the expectations. So for a Gen X manager, instead of doing what maybe would be natural to you and what you would want, which is, take it and run with it and do whatever you want, during the handoff, it can be more like, here's the project. All right, I'm giving this to you on a Monday. It's going to be due on Wednesday. On Tuesday, I'm going to give you a half hour, and we can sit and we can kind of go over where you're at. We can brainstorm for a little while. We can think of some new ideas if you want. And that gives the millennial an opportunity to check in. It gives them the opportunity to collaborate, to brainstorm, to use some of that power. But it also helps the Xer manage their time and have that ability to still have their independence. But it forces them to also be a little bit collaborative. So that's one way to do it. And millennials really do need to understand what's great about organizing a check-in is that for those first 24 hours, millennials are forced to just push through and go with the project as far as they can possibly go without having to check in, without having clarification questions, things like that, so that it pushes them to learn how to be more independent. Now, the last thing with this Xer millennial collision is around feedback. Gen Xers have a very sensitive BSO-meter. They are allergic to sugarcoating. It is very different, and now they are managing a generation that we've never been told were anything but awesome. Right? I have a 6th place gymnastics trophy. My parents were like, you're the next Olympian. I'm like, I don't think so. That doesn't really seem accurate. But feedback is an interesting part, and I'll give you a perfect example. Lynn and David. Lynn is a baby boomer. After I show her a script or do a presentation, we sit down in a formal setting. She's got her stuff, she's got her pen, all of that. And she's like, Traditionalist, that was really good. Baby boomers, great job. The transition between baby boomers and Gen Xers, you have some, what is it called? It's areas of opportunity. And I'm like, nice. Areas of opportunity, that sounds great. And then she walks me through it, and we both feel really positive after that experience. David, the Gen Xer, he's like, Traditionalists were good, baby boomers were good, that transition was horrible. I don't know what you were thinking. You need to throw out the entire thing and do it all over. Let's go to lunch. And I'm like, wait, wait, what? And before you know it, I'm in tears because he has just given it to me straight to the gut. And this is a lot of times how Gen Xers are giving feedback, and this is not a way that millennials were made to understand feedback. And the reason that I talk about this is because it actually is a bottom line issue. We've been able to track the decision to leave a company back to the first performance review. Because instead of feeling motivated after, millennials are feeling deflated and feeling like they have nothing to offer you, and then they leave. So it wasn't just that our parents were telling us that we were so great. We also grew up in this grade inflation. There was a lot of that happening. In fact, 48% of college freshmen graduated from high school with an A- or better GPA. And in our M-Factor survey, less than 5% of all respondents said that millennials were well prepared to handle feedback. So a tip here is to have millennials do self-evaluations. A lot of companies are now doing this where they'll give the millennial a form and they ask, think about the areas that you feel like you could use some coaching, that you could use some mentorship, areas that you know are not your strongest. And then on the other side, also write down the areas that you feel like you're really contributing. But honestly think about areas where you're really going above and beyond. And you'll be surprised, because they'll go home, who do they call? Mom and dad, right? Mom and Dad, this is what it says. What do you think I should put? And they'll talk about that. But you will be surprised at how there is an amount of self-awareness. There is this is a realistic generation. On one hand, they have these optimistic, idealistic boomer parents. On the other hand, they saw a lot at a very young age, and they're realistic. And they will come into your office with closer to what you would write than you'd actually think. And then you're no longer the bad guy, and there's also some self-reflection. Because you have to remember that this is how we grew up, and you'll see in this great clip from Meet the Fockers.
What's that?
It's you! It's the Wall of Gaylord.
The Wall of Gaylord?
Isn't it nice to finally display your accomplishments, son?
Yeah. Honey, look at all your awards. That's great.
He's my champion.
Oh, I didn't know they made 9th place ribbons.
Oh, Jack, they got him all the way up to 10th place.
Hey, anybody want to get a drink out by the lagoon?
This one looks impressive. Mazel Tov, Gaylord M. Fokker, world's greatest nurse. Very nice.
We have always tried to instill a sense of self in Gaylord without being too goal-oriented. Not about winning or losing. It's about passion. We just wanted him to love what he's doing. You know what I mean, Jack?
Not really, Bernard. I think a competitive drive is the essential key that makes America the only remaining superpower in the world today.
Well, whatever works.
All right, so we talked about our traditionalists, our baby boomers, our Gen Xers, and hopefully I've given you some tips and tools that you can use within your organizations to better engage and recruit and retain and motivate this young generation that is going to be catapulting into your workplace. I have to thank Dana Knowles so much, who organized so much of this and brought me in. I so appreciate it. And Bill Moore, whose idea this was. He's familiar with Bridgeworks' work, and he decided to bring us in. So thank you for that. And yes, thank you. And I do have to say, with the just brief time that I have been able to spend with the people who put this on and this whole team, this is such a great community. And the fact that it's a Sunday morning and none of you seem too hungover and you're all here, it's very impressive. And it is such a, and when you say this is the best kept secret, before this project, to be honest, did not know very much about Tallahassee. But this is such a great community, and it's so supportive. And like I said before, it's in these supportive communities that we see the envelope being pushed, because people have each other's backs. And I think that that is so fantastic. And I saved my favorite campaign for last, but in the iconic words of Bob Dylan, may we all stay forever young.
May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. And may you stay forever young. May you stay forever young.
Yo, 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 may your hands always be busy. May your feet always be swift. And may you have a strong foundation when the winds of change shift. And may your heart always be joyful. And may your song always be sung. May you stay forever young. May you stay forever young.
Every generation refreshes the world.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Okay, yeah. And we do have, thank you. We do have some time for Q&A, so if there are any questions or anything, we can do that, I think. I'm sorry, what's next? Or what did someone ask? Or here, we'll go here first. Yes.
Presentation before,
Yeah.
could you just touch on the cuspers, the people who, like, I was born at the tail end of baby boomer, but I find my traits more like a Gen Xer sometimes.
Bill has seen this, and so I told him that now he can go on the road and give this presentation because he's got it down by now. So what Bill's talking about are cuspers. So are there people in this room who, when I showed those dates, you sort of felt like you had 1 foot in one generation, 1 foot in another? A lot of you. Okay. So in the first book from Bridgeworks, When Generations Collide, there's a whole actual chapter devoted to called Cuspers, the Friendly Ghost. But what these people are people who fall right in between two generations. And what we have found is that sometimes these people feel like they're not part of the generation's conversation, when really what we have found is that they're generationally bilingual, which you can put on your resume and people will be really impressed. But they're important in communication because you speak both languages. You're able to understand that baby boomer competitiveness, that drive, and you're also able to understand a lot of where that Xer skepticism comes from and that fierce independence. But it is okay to, when you're looking at events and conditions for different generations, cuspers, you're gonna look in baby boomer and Gen X or whatever it is, and you're gonna identify with different pieces of both. And that's perfectly fine. That's how it works. Yeah.
Help the baby boomers. We tend to be the managers now. What are our greatest weaknesses and where can we improve our communication skills?
That is a great question. That's another presentation. But there are a couple things. God, I don't even know what to touch on first, but I will say that a big one that we see, baby boomers are very optimistic and idealistic. They invented stretch goals. Hey, those really lofty goals, that was motivating to a baby boomer. For a millennial, that is paralyzing. What happens with millennials is they're a very realistic and pragmatic generation. So when you're looking at goal setting and you're looking at those stretch goals, what boomers are thinking is like, yeah, this is gonna push them, push them, push them. And millennials are looking at that number and being like, there is no way. There is no way. It's totally unrealistic and it's very demotivating. And so one thing to look at in terms of just goal setting is thinking about what would be realistic, something that they can hit. Something that is still aggressive, but something that can really be hit. In terms of communication, oh my gosh, it really is another presentation. I'm going to stick with that. But we can talk after the presentation also, and I can give you some precise tips on that as well. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
About 20 years ago, I read Strauss and Howe's book, Generations.
Oh, yeah. You're a real expert.
Yeah, well, no, not by a long shot. But one of the things that I got a big kick out of, and which I'd love for you to comment on and explain if you can, because I don't think they did, is that the same generation that was burning their draft cards and their bras and everything else is the same generation that led the fight for school uniforms for their children. And how can one generation be both of those things?
Right. The great dichotomy of the baby boomers. This is something that completely fascinates me, because you've got the generation that was fighting against the man for their entire adolescence, and then they became the man. And you gotta be like, how did that happen? There are a couple of reasons for that. One of them being is that, and this is something that I think as we see millennials go into upper management, we're gonna see some interesting patterns there too, in terms of what part of their life is going to be deemed more important. But that competitive spirit, the thing with baby boomers is that when they saw those traditionalist institutions, it wasn't like, we want to break them down. It was like, we understand on some level why they're here, but they're going to change. And it was this drive for change that resulted in them, putting in all of these hours and restructuring the institution from the ground up and doing all of that. And even the school uniform thing, sometimes when you talk to people who are really behind that, one of the big things is that they don't want kids to be judged. They don't want, and which goes along with some boomer traits, which goes along with some of those boomer ideas of, people should just be judged on what they're saying and their ideas, and they shouldn't be bullied, and it shouldn't be broken down into what you look like and things like that. And so that is part of it. But there was this drive, that competitive spirit in some ways overcame the idea of everything being, we are free to be you and me. And they wanted to change everything. And that was what pushed them into becoming this huge entity that they are now, where they are on top of these institutions. Yeah.
As a Gen Xer on the cusp, how do we go to the boomers and convince them to listen to our ideas and maybe I don't know, and take some of our ideas and meld it into their professional wisdom?
Yes. I think there's a component of this that is generational, and I think there's a component of it that is not. I think that every person's greatest fear is becoming irrelevant. And I think that one thing that's happening while people are either managing up or trying to get a generation older than them on board is that the older generation feels incredibly disrespected by that. And so one thing is just to lay that respectful groundwork right away. So it's not like, I've got this idea and you've got it, and this is it, and I'm the newest and all of that, but it's more respecting the place that they come from. One way that we say this is it's evolution versus revolution, where revolution is that it seeks to upset or replace. And so it's in that language where you're like, oh, this is going to make the old way look like the Stone Age, and the way that you've been doing it, that's old, that's not how we do it anymore. You got to listen to this and get on board with this. A baby boomer is listening to that and being like, who do you think you are? Where evolution is, you've done great things with everything that has been at your disposal, and we so appreciate that, and you built this foundation. I have some ideas on how we can build upon what you've made. So it's respecting their legacy while still pushing it forward. That would be my idea on that. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Can you expand on, with the number of new accounts on Facebook being Gen X, being baby boomers, what does that translate into this intergenerational society that we're in, that we're discussing this morning? What does that all mean?
Boomers were always the early adopters. Okay, where traditionalists would wait for the person down the street to have it, boomers were always the first one out the gate. So it actually doesn't surprise me at all that the fastest growing segment on Facebook is baby boomers. One thing that I have to say is that they're using Facebook, but they're using it very differently than millennials. There's an unwritten code of conduct on social media that millennials who grew up in it have a different understanding. The best example that I have is my mom will get a friend request, And she's like, well, should I accept this? I'm not really that close with this person. I'm like, oh no, friend doesn't mean friend. It's just like a person you sort of know. You know, I mean, the whole language has changed. Like, I don't have 1,200 friends. I have like 6 friends, but I mean, on Facebook, you just have 1,200 friends. But what does it mean for intergenerational things? Between baby boomers and millennials, I still think that it's a gap, that there is a difference there. The way that they're using it and the way that they're capitalizing on its power is different. I would say that what's going to be even more interesting to watch are Gen Xers and their children, the next generation, because between traditionalists and boomers, there was a huge cultural revolution. Between boomers and millennials, there was a huge digital revolution. And there hasn't been a drastic revolution between Xers and their children. So we see now, I mean, Xers and their children are both comfortable with technology. The way they dress is somewhat similar. The music they listen to is somewhat similar. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that relationship is going to translate and how it's going to form. But even though a lot of boomers are on Facebook, it's a different Facebook. I mean, it's a different thing that they are living in. It's a good question.
My question has to do with the fact that baby boomers are living longer, but we're also taking care of our kids who are staying at home longer after they graduate college, and our parents who are also staying at home because we're taking care of them. How does that translate into what we're going to see in the workforce? That's a great question, and actually one thing that definitely keeps us in business, so thank goodness that that's happening. But baby boomers are an incredibly sandwiched generation, and this plays out in a couple ways. First of all, they're just unbelievably busy. They've also ascended into roles in companies where there's a lot of pressure, and they have huge responsibilities, and then on the home front, they're dealing with aging parents, and then their brilliant millennial children can't get jobs, and they're sleeping on their, on the couch in the basement. And one way that this is transferring into the workplace, a couple ways. One way is that millennials need to better understand how to manage their manager, how to manage that time. Because for millennials, we have had access to every single person we've ever wanted since we were 10 years old. We can tweet at Barack Obama or Kim Kardashian, and we're used to just always being able to speak with whoever we want. Well, then we'll hear from senior executives. They're like, I was walking back from the bathroom, and a kid stops me and is like, oh, hey, great, I need to ask you a question. And a boomer is like, I do not have time right now to dive into this and answer your question. So, we work on some of the onboarding processes for companies, and that is one thing that we discuss with millennial new hires, is how to understand time management and how to set up predetermined benchmarks with their baby boomer managers so that they understand how crunched they are for time and how instant access does not translate into the workplace. Their expectations around hierarchy and agendas and setting times and things like that. Did that answer your question? Good. Good. Anything else? One last one? Oh my gosh, I am on this huge screen right now. This is horrifying. Okay, yes. That's a great question. And again, that is another presentation. But millennials, we have a lot to learn. I mean, we do. And it also goes back to evolution versus revolution. It goes back to respect. One thing that millennials are really guilty of, I'm guilty of sometimes too, is because technology has changed the pyramid a little bit, because what's happening are these younger generations, the generation younger than me, they're going to be better at technology than I am, and faster and quicker and more innovative than I am, and that's how it's happening right now. But it's understanding that just because someone doesn't have the latest and greatest and the newest iPhone, there's still so much to learn from them. And I would say that a great tip for millennials is a strong set of mentors is the difference between a good employee and a great employee, and a good leader and a great leader. And so it's talking less and listening more. And it's finding the people who you need to have your back and figuring out how to add value to them. I mean, how I even got the job at Bridgeworks was banging down David Stillman's door until he finally agreed to let me work for him for free, which I did. And you find, how can I add value to you? And that, you gotta crush the entitlement stereotypes, you gotta crush the work ethic stereotypes, put in the hours and do what it takes. Thank you.